Log entry 201409.25. I've been stationed by the Hierarchy Central Command aboard a small assault class vessel commanded by Class 1 Overseer Chris McGee.
And I'm telling you, the Hierarchy would never approve such an episode to be recorded.
He was lecturing one of my least favorite people, Class 47 Underling Ash Hulme.
I have already submitted the plans for a Type 3 stealth assault on this topic to the Hierarchy. Do you have a 27B/6?
Oh, by the way, my name is Class 19 Backstabber Ben McLean. Unlike on board our intended target, the USS Trekosophy, our range of thinking within the Hierarchy is very limited. We do not explore topics in depth. Instead, we bicker and argue and make plans for tackling topics that we never get to because of months of downtime. Still, it appears things are going to turn out differently today.
You can't waste the Central Command's time with every random topic suggestion that crosses your mind.
The Hierarchy approves.
Very well. We'll prepare a Type 3 stealth assault on the USS Trekosophy.
And welcome to Trekosophy, the Star Trek philosophy podcast, where we talk about the philosophy of Star Trek and stuff.
Big surprise.
Yes. Today, we're obviously talking about the race from Voyager called the Hierarchy. And the first episode in which they appear, Dr. Tenor...
He's already flubbed.
Tunka Tenor Dr. Spy.
Right, Tenor Dr. Spy. I just can never get that title correct. Tinker Tenor Dr. Spy. There we go. Unless I'm actually reading it and I can actually see it, I never get that right. This one is where... Oh, shoot. What's the name of the actor who plays the Doctor? I can't remember.
Robert Picardo.
That's right. Robert Picardo. He really has he just really goes to town on this episode. Let's get right into it. What happens... Let's talk about just... What are all the themes that are in this episode, would you say?
Well, let me ask you this real quickly. Just out of curiosity, I'm sure the audience is curious as well to know, why did we choose this particular topic, especially for a Trekosophy episode? What's the philosophy of daydreaming in the Hierarchy here?
Well, I think...
just in brief.
We started to bring this up when we were talking about privacy and surveillance of your citizens as an issue back in the spring. But at this point, I think it's really kind of become its own thing. And this episode gets into the difference between fantasy and reality is one big topic, and that the distinction between appearance and reality is a big deal in the history of philosophy, that's for sure.
Yeah. And
also the concept of limited thinking versus sort of more open thinking is a strong cultural theme, at the very least, among philosophers, certainly. And how do you tell the dream from the reality is a big part of it, and also the whole question of tyrannical governments is also explored. So it's and also just to what extent is a person responsible for the contents of their fantasies? Or are they responsible at all for the contents of their fantasies?
That's a good point. Yeah,
and so there's just a whole bunch of interesting topics that this episode raises, I think. And I think first is probably we ought to talk about the dream part of it. But I might say first, real quick, that we need to be very careful not to spend all of our time on that, because there's a lot to get to. So let's make sure not spend more than, say, 15 minutes on the whole question of dreams and whatnot. But
ladies and gentlemen, start your stopwatch.
Right. If anyone could start a clock, that'd be good. I'm not going to go and lecture you all on the topic of dreams and reality. I'm trying to think of a good sort of question to start us off with. Can anyone sort of think of a good question? That's a question.
Well, the good question that immediately popped into my mind is the one that you just mentioned, which is how much should a person be responsible for their daydreams and fantasies? And I guess that you have to kind of take that into context as to responsible in what way. I mean, other people seeing them, you mean?
I meant sort of morally responsible. Can they be
Okay.
morally praised or blamed for the contents of their fantasies?
Like if I had daydreams about killing someone or something,
yes.
Should I be investigated because of that?
Yeah, that, but also the question of, would you be morally obligated to try to take actions to sort of get your fantasies under control? Or is it not anything you can change or fix? Or is it cathartic? Or things like that, if you had... And the whole question of schizophrenia as well is brought up by this. Is there really such a thing as a multiple personality disorder, or is something else? What's really going on with someone who's experiencing schizophrenia? Because that's clearly what the doctor is going through in this episode is schizophrenia.
Well, technically speaking, schizophrenia is not multiple personality, but clinically speaking, they're very different things.
Yeah, but, that's true. Yeah, I'm just thinking, though, that opening up that type of mental disorder or mental condition I
think of the movie A Beautiful Mind, when I think of schizophrenia.
Yeah, I think what I meant was schizophrenia not multiple personality disorder. But then again, if anyone has an interesting point to make on multiple personality disorder as well, then I wouldn't say no to that either. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of being responsible for your daydreams and fantasies and whatnot, I will say that as long as you can handle the fact that they're not real and that they are to remain a fantasy and not to be brought into the real world, then I'd say you're just fine. It's when you start to try and make them become a reality that you might run into some problems. Would you disagree or agree on that, or what?
Well, I'm not sure. This question comes into law at the present time. Where this question comes into matters of law is in the area of child pornography.
Good point.
That's where the rubber hits the road on the question of whether you're responsible for your fantasies. Because there's child pornography which depicts actual children who have been exploited for the purposes of producing child pornography. And I don't think very many moral philosophers, I suppose there are some, but I don't think very many moral philosophers would approve of or excuse the exploitation of children in this way.
Right.
However, there is also material that is produced without using any actual
exactly.
children.
That's what I was going to bring up. Exactly. Whether about just drawings or painting, something that didn't actually use a real child photographed or whatever.
Yes, it also falls within the definition most people would have of child pornography, and it can carry the same criminal penalties. And that is more controversial among philosophers and people who are interested in philosophy of law.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, so I'm just saying, this isn't an idle question. It has political consequences. That's what I'm bringing up here.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I like that. Well, I think I pretty much made my stance on that issue pretty clear. I before I became a Christian, again, I guess you could call it a born-again Christian, but I had actually toyed with the idea of becoming Wiccan. I had studied that, read up a lot on it, and one of its biggest tenets, which actually is shared by many other religions, is "and in harm none, do what you will." Basically, is as long as it does not harm anyone, yourself or other people, do whatever you want. And of course, that has far-reaching implications. Harm none, meaning in the past or future, as well as right now. And you have to really kind of think about it sometimes when you're considering doing something. is it going to harm anyone? And so taking that, kind of ideology to this particular conundrum of whether or not you're responsible for that, I say as long as no one is harmed by what you're doing, what you're, what's happening, then I say go for it. Enjoy.
That is a large part of the question. To what extent? I'm not offering an opinion. I'm trying to sort of lay out the controversy here.
Okay.
The argument basically goes that by sharing this type of material, you are sort of feeding into these impulses of these sickos who actually end up abusing children, who have been sort of brought on by more and more exposure to this kind of thing.
Isn't that a little like saying that violent video games proliferate violence in kids?
Yes, the argument has an identical structure, and it's often made by some of the same people. However, the scale on which it is made is much, much larger, I would say. It seems that we're talking about something that is much bigger, and I think it's reasonable to think has a much larger psychological or psychedelic impact than video games of the ordinary mainstream variety.
And back in the 60s, it was blamed on rock and roll.
People
still blamed on rock and roll to an extent.
people going crazy, or you mean violence?
It's corrupting our youth. They're
Well, here we're not even talking about youth. We're talking about adults.
I know.
And
but
we're talking. We're not even talking
that
about violence. We're talking about sex. So there is a difference there.
Right. My point is that if someone is being influenced by this proliferation of child pornography, in the fact that, well, it doesn't harm anyone, so why do it all you want, as long as it doesn't, you're not taking photographs of naked children or whatever, then it might actually cause people to start to get into it more. My point is that those people are probably already have problems, and that this it might be a bit of a catalyst. I don't know, but they probably already had problems to begin with.
I'd be very interested to see if there are any studies on whether that does actually operate as a gateway to being into child pornography or as an outlet for people who have those fantasies. I'm not sure that you can stop people from having those sort of pedophilic fantasies. It's an ugly thing to acknowledge, but I'm not sure that you can stop people from having those sort of fantasies. And
that's
whether if fake pornography operates maybe as an outlet for someone for at least part of that population to get over their fantasies without harming an actual child.
Well, there's 2 points to make about that. First of all, you can't stop someone having a fantasy of something that is illegal, but you certainly can work to penalize sharing a certain class of materials on the internet.
I'll go along with that.
And the internet currently, the way the laws are, anyone could be prosecuted because of the content, irrespective of how it is produced. And I'm not saying that we should necessarily change that. I'm not sure. But I think, because I have to look not just at what's right, but also what is the kind of thing that you can send someone to jail for rightfully.
Yeah.
And it's kind of difficult. It creates a weird legal gray area where it's not entirely clear on what basis we could send this person to prison and not send this person to prison.
You have to have a clear line of delineation somewhere.
Yeah, and
yeah, I agree, Ash.
Oh, right. Sorry. I just
wanted to bring this to a close. I didn't want to get too far into this topic, even though it is fascinating. Yes. Ash, what's your thoughts on this?
I would like to get more into this topic, but because I think it's really interesting. But you told us to watch the clock.
Yeah. I might say though that this kind of connects to how the Doctor is, to bring it back to Star Trek, this kind of connects to how the Doctor is having all these fantasies about Seven of Nine. And I'm not suggesting those are the same exactly, but I am saying, to what extent is he responsible for those in a moral sense, in an interpersonal sense, things like that. That's a topic that the episode brings out. But let's get to talking about the hierarchy, because that's when the episode gets more sort of less psychological and more sort of science fictional, and it's all kinds of fun and political too, but not quite as darkly political, but still darkly political because it's a tyranny. So it's kind of weird.
One last real quick thing on the daydreams there about the Doctor fantasizing about 7 of 9 and so forth. And we can go into this in depth some other time. But what I wanted to say was, I think 7 of 9, the real 7 of 9, actually kind of takes it pretty well. And in my mind, it seems like, well, it's just showing that the Doctor has a healthy libido. I don't see anything wrong with that. But it also shows, well, if he does have a libido, that kind of brings him one step closer to being actually human, doesn't it? So interesting for a hologram to have that, but we'll touch on that another time.
Yeah, this also relates to, I think, a lot of those other Star Trek episodes where people see, the fantasies of others.
With Deanna Troi seeing herself there. Muzzle it.
Phantasms to an extent. Geordie and Leah Brahms is another one.
Yep,
Looking at the extent to which people either feel or are victimized by the use of their image on the holosuites or the holodecks.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that
in the future. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll have to do one on Brahms maybe later this season of Trekosophy. We'll do the episode about that. But let's get to the hierarchy. Right.
Carry on.
Well, let's just talk about maneuver warfare for a second.
Are you desperately trying to say that the hierarchy is a sort of parody of the chain of command that exists in Starfleet?
No, not exactly. But in fact, I wasn't even going to go with Starfleet, but that's a good idea. But I have something interesting to say about military doctrine. Traditionally, on a simple level, in any military structure, you have the soldiers who are expected to do whatever their officer tells them, period. And
no questioning.
That's as complicated as it gets. Okay. And then we had, it was in the 1980s, we had a sort of revolution in the Pentagon's military doctrine, which was around the same time Orson Scott Card was writing the Ender's Game books. And in Ender's Game, Ender articulates this sort of alternative theory of military command in which a good commander is expected to sort of have this certain level of trust in his subordinates to think for themselves within these sort of lines or parameters he has sort of trained into them ahead of time, so that the real commanding happens more in training than in the actual battle. And that's maneuver warfare in a nutshell. It's the idea that the individual squads of just a few soldiers, each squad, even though it is given an objective from above, nevertheless thinks for itself within the parameters that it's been given for the mission and according to what it's learned in training. All right. And Ender's Game is still to this day on the recommended reading list of the U.S. Marines Officers Training College because of it being an early exposition in fiction of what has now become, to a large extent, actual military doctrine, which has been called maneuver warfare theory. You can look it up on Wikipedia. And Orson Scott Card, he's just trying to write a cool science fiction novel. He had no idea he was coming up with an actual, that this could actually be a thing, but it is now. So anyway, the hierarchy, oddly enough, narrow as they are, seem to operate according to maneuver warfare. Except, almost well, no, they don't seem to operate according to maneuver warfare. They operate in a sort of bizarre and twisted sort of parody of maneuver warfare because they have their internal hierarchy, and then they have a way for any member of the crew, no matter how lowly, to go around their superiors and submit ideas to the upper echelons. And this ensures that no incompetent officer can...
You mean echelon?
Yeah, yes. This ensures that no incompetent officer can conceal information from the brass at the expense of totally undermining discipline within the ranks. And I think they're able to do that because they're sort of programmed on a psychological level not to become rebellious. But that programming seems to be sort of, you can see that programming is just sort of coming undone over the course of the episode. So it's really interesting how they sort of are a parody of a lot of different ideas in military doctrine. So there's my spiel on the hierarchy. And they're just hilariously funny to watch. Anyways, so the questions then that we ought to get to is how to be a good commander, and how do you maintain control over your troops without creating the situation where your troops know something that you don't know, that if you knew you'd be able to give better orders, but they don't tell you because they're supposed to be obeying you. You see what I'm saying? And yet if they tell you, then they'll be seen as insubordinate and be making you look like a fool. So how can you get all that information that you need to get from your men without looking like a fool or undermining the need for military discipline? And that's a problem that an organization like the hierarchy would have just from a strategic standpoint. I mean, that's an actual angle that occurred to me to look at here, where normally we'd be talking about, authoritarian, regime, but that's kind of been done to death now that I think about it, So here's another interesting angle.
Well, it's interesting because in Starfleet, at least, we don't really see that sort of military. It's supposedly a military organization, but we don't see that sort of, stand at attention, do what you're told without questioning it, all the time. We see it once in a while, but not very often.
Well, you don't see it all the time in the actual military either. I mean, in training more than in actual day-to-day life. Yeah. In day-to-day life, you see it. It's almost like an entirely different world once you actually get down to work in the military. In day-to-day life, they don't. It's a lot like civilian jobs. In once you get down to the out of the training phase that is so much shown on TV, and into actually being in the military and on a day-to-day basis, it's really a lot like a civilian job. It's not really all that different for most people, except during
I wasn't aware of that.
Well, so it's not like boot camp or anything all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I think you do see that in Starfleet to an extent because especially with what they tend to show is also as sort of more liberal commanders like Kirk and Picard.
Yeah.
I guess the authoritarian types, you do see them, but they tend to be portrayed as, I don't know, bad commanders or
and that's probably
somehow
accurate.
Below the ideal.
That's probably accurate to a large extent. The officers that everybody hates are quite often actually bad officers, except during boot camp. Boot camp, you have to remember, boot camp is completely different from a lot of the ordinary experience in the military. The drill sergeant that everyone hates the most is probably the best drill sergeant. But once you're out of training and you're in actual assignments, then the officers that everybody hates probably aren't the good officers. So it's sort of flip-flops in my opinion there.
So you got in Starfleet you have your Jellicos and your Nechayevs and your all that people say, oh my god, they're so terrible and authoritarian and they make Riker, poor Riker. But on the other hand, in a way they're actually quite good at what they do. I don't know. I don't hate those characters for some reason.
The meddling visiting star.
Yeah, the meddling
Oh
ones.
yeah, I don't
That's the
hate
one.
the characters. I think they make excellent antagonists for a Star Trek story. I think it's good writing, except that it gives you this impression of Starfleet that I've said before, and the Federation in general, that what people call Star Trek philosophy is, if we take the evidence of the show, is really only believed by the 7 or 8 people on the show. Because anytime anybody comes from anywhere else in the Federation, they're a complete disaster, and they don't really believe in what we think of as Star Trek philosophy really at all, especially if they're an
Yeah.
admiral, which is just funny.
Yeah, here's your promotion, here's your admiral thing, and here's your frontal lobotomy.
Yes, here's how to be a dick. It's in the manual.
Definitely Starfleet Admiral Manual Chapter 1.
Being a dick. Okay.
Are we allowed to say that in here?
What? I
can bleep it.
I think it's probably okay.
Contextually, it's probably okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's more about just sort of the attitude, keeping a lid on way too much of the foul language, not being a common thing, Yeah. Once in a while.
I just didn't know if it would earn us that explicit tag in iTunes.
Oh, I don't think so, but I could be wrong. I hope not.
Well, we can look it up later. I'm not worried about it right now. I can always leave it.
Yeah, well, this isn't a show for kids.
Head.
Yeah.
Being a poopy head as a
yeah, well, this isn't a show for little kids. I hope we are clear that this is a show for at least 13 and up. I mean,
intelligent adults.
Yes, this show is intended for semi-intelligent adults at least.
I don't know about you, but my mind was a hell of a lot dirtier at 13 than what it is now.
Okay, well. That's just great. In all seriousness, no. The question of leadership is an area not just of ethics, but of strategy and psychology and a whole bunch of disciplines that go into the question of how to be a good leader and how to sort of design an institution or system in a way that avoids the problem of information blockage, and the problem of insubordination. Solutions to the problem of information blockage may cause insubordination, but solutions to the problem of insubordination may cause information blockage. So you're on a knife's edge. How do you solve both those problems at once? It's one of the seminal questions of leadership theory, you might say. And it gives it to us in a humorous context in this episode, really, in a nutshell, which I thought was pretty funny. There's also the whole question of the Doctor's ambitions for advancement beyond his programming, which is interesting because that's really the theme that ties it all together, is advancement beyond your ordinary social expectations. Both the alien and the Doctor are both trying to sort of advance beyond their programming to unlock their hidden potential, right? See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's the underlying thing. And we see in the Doctor what is really the deepest ambition he has. It's this vision of himself receiving an award. And getting in 7 of 9's pants. But let's talk about the award. I think the award is actually his deepest ambition. And
be recognized by the crew as an important member.
Yes, but I think it's not even so much getting recognized as it is being the sort of person who would actually deserve that kind of recognition. Saving the ship. I have to save the ship. That's his dearest ambition.
Yep.
And I mean, there's an element of pride and vanity there because it's the Doctor, but there's also that element of wanting to be the person who actually saves the ship because he cares about the people on it. And that is it actually shows there's this element of sort of callous selfishness in every one of us. But there's also, I think a lot of us hopefully would like to think we also have nobler ambitions. And that's the Doctor's nobler ambition. See what I'm saying there? Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, so I think to an extent the whole idea of recognition is also quite important to the Doctor, because in a way that's his greatest hurdle as a hologram, especially, is to be recognised as a full and valued member of the crew.
Yeah. Getting recognized as a person, the whole thing Data was dealing with for so long, comes up again in Voyager. We're never through with that, are we? I think I might propose
you have to have a role of someone outside looking into humanity.
Yeah.
And of course, that's somewhat encapsulated by Neelix and Cass at the beginning, and then later 709.
Oh yeah. We need to have an episode about Seven, about something other than her breasts, because yeah.
She was a very good character.
What else is there to talk about?
She had very large breasts. No, seriously. She's a good character. Beyond, she's not just eye candy. She is a good character. She's legit, and this sort of cold, emotionless, borginess makes her way more Vulcan than T'Pel, in my opinion. She. I mean,
yeah.
They could have made her.
That depends how broadly you define Vulcan, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the fact that she has this sort of unemotional way of looking at everything.
T'Pel's one you could talk about if you want to talk about drugs and addiction and stuff.
That's true.
Drugs and addiction. Where did we get to drugs and addiction from?
Season 3 of Enterprise.
Oh, well, I meant in our conversation just now.
Oh, you mentioned something about it. I can't remember.
You mentioned something earlier.
Oh, I did. Okay.
We should talk more about that kind of thing.
Okay.
Start adding these to our list right now.
Okay. Well,
drugs. Drugs are bad, okay?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I
know everyone hates when other people fake their accents.
You almost have the American accent down, but you still had a certain New Zealand lisp in there of your vowel. Your vowel wasn't
drugs
quite.
Drugs are bad, okay?
Yeah. See, he wouldn't.
Because drugs are bad.
Yeah, you sound still. You still sound like a Beatles member. Still, sorry. You don't quite. Yeah, you have that. That was still too much Liverpool.
It's funny because that's funny because one accent I can never do is Liverpudlian. Well,
try and do a redneck, and then you'll be there, because you almost had it. Yeah, you have to get your vowels right. Wrong. You have to get your vowels completely wrong to do redneck correctly. Let's see. What were you trying to say? Drugs are bad, right? Okay, so it'd be like, drugs are bad, okay? Drugs are bad, okay? Something like that. You have to add a bunch of extra unnecessary vowels. Just like that.
Add an extra syllable. Turn one syllable into two syllables.
Yeah.
My mama is my brother's sister.
Well, yeah.
So you have to add the unnecessary, redundant vowels to get the redneck accent right. So just okay.
To anyone on the south of the United States, I do apologize.
Yes, you didn't sound quite dumb enough, all right? I've actually wanted, I've wanted to get involved in the StarCraft map making community, partly because the Terrans are all rednecks. Or at least they were in the 90s. They've kind of become less redneck in StarCraft 2, but I'd like to do a StarCraft story material where the Terrans are back to being the rednecks we all remember, who have this terrible, terrible Southern accent that is just hilarious. like it's a Zerglin, Lester, a smaller type of Zerg. You know, stuff like that, which is just so funny. Anyways, where were we? I just love accents, especially terrible ones. Where were we talking about? Oh, right, 7 of 9.
Believe me, I've heard a few terrible imitations.
Probably
in my
like
time
it when Kira
usually from Ellen Davis on
does
QI.
that really bad Russian accent in that spy episode on DS9.
Which one?
What's that one where both Garrick and Bashir were stuck in the
Bashir
in one of his spy fantasies, and
I love that episode.
Kira shows up and she's got this really bad Russian accent, you know.
Oh, that was so fun! I love that.
Funny.
Yeah,
Julian.
About accents, there's this sort of really unique accent that I would call the. We were talking about British accents earlier, and there's really unique accent that I would just call the Dick Van Dyke accent. And
all right, governor.
Yeah, Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins. He does not sound Cockney at all. He sounds completely unique.
He's his own accent.
His Cockney is so bad. It's fake Cockney, but it's so bad that it's this accent that you just do not hear anywhere else in the world.
Exactly.
Except in Elementary Dear Data.
It's its own thing, and I'd like to see like a show. Like if I was doing an episode of Star Trek, I would try and do a planet where everyone talks like Dick Van Dyke. I'm like, no, this is not Liverpool, or this is not Cockney. This is Dick Van Dyke speak. Get it wrong. I mean, right. I mean, yeah.
All right, Governor. Hello. What's going on here then?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, very bad.
Wouldn't that be a crazy Star Trek episode where somebody had patterned their entire society after Mary Poppins, the Disney movie?
Oh, gotta write that fanfic.
that would be a great Star Trek episode. That would be a great thing for the Chris Pine crew to discover instead of the Gangster Planet, I guess.
Captain Jean-Luc Picard from the U.S. Enterprise.
Exactly, and they would have the crazy thing about, and they'd have the crazy thing about firing a cannon to tell time and everything. Okay, so anyway, so these are the kinds of ideas that happen when you plan a Type 3 stealth assault on the USS Trekosophy, I have to say.
Apparently.
All right, so where were we? Oh yeah, 7 of 9. We have to do an episode on 7 of 9 someday.
I've written that down already in our document.
Okay, so is that about? We've sort of wrapped it up on Dr. Tinker Spy,
Tinker Tenor Dr. Spy.
Right. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I think we have. Any final thoughts? I'm sorry, I kind of phased out for the last 20 minutes there. I guess my adrenaline rush finally ran off from the beginning of the episode.
I think we kind of phased out a bit too, to be honest.
Things went in an odd direction, but I think it should still be entertaining.
Alrighty then. Well, I think we can call that an episode. So, thanks for listening. You can find us at Trekosophy.com. You can find us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Send us an email to trekosophy@gmail.com. And please...
But don't bother the hierarchy with every stupid idea you think of.
Absolutely not. They won't always approve. And please leave us a review in iTunes. Send us any questions you might have or topics for future episodes. And join us next time where we might talk about 7 of 9 and her huge boobs. Who knows?
The Scientific Tasmanian. What the hell is that?
Where? Huh? Who? Where? Who?
Galaxy's Child.
Oh, well, yeah, everyone watch Galaxy's Child
if you just see that episode, the first picture you see is of that creature giving birth to the baby one.
Squirting out a baby space monster.
And you can see that it's definitely the early days of CGI there.
Faux shizzle. What do we got on our topic list here? Oh, my foot's asleep. Ow, that really hurts.
I think this will work out just fine. Oh, and by the way, those are not huge boobs that she has. I've been on Second Life